So the idea behind this new series is to work on some of the. I've got several projects going using the Year Zero engine. The ones I'm going to be looking at are going to be ones which are using the OGLs rather than looking at hacks of existing systems. Hey, Estinata. So yeah. Oh man, this music is way too loud in my headphones. Hold on. Oh boy, that's really distracting. Okay, that's better for me. And it's probably you probably can't hear anything now, so give me a second to just tweak that. Yeah. Where was I? I've got The Witcher 3 kind of distracting me. Yeah. So this series is basically... Let me start over from scratch because I'm going to be recording this. I'm going to be taking a highlight of this and sending it to YouTube. Just to make it a little bit tidier. So the idea behind this new series is to, document some game design as I'm looking at some of the projects I've got using the Year Zero engine, taking them from concept through to playtest. So the focus really here is on getting stuff down into Google Docs, as you can see I've got open here on the screen, and just really getting the rough first draft out and going. So, yeah, that's the plan. That's what I'm going to do. So the game I'm working on right now, my mic volume seems really quiet. Let me just... It is really quiet for some reason. Thank you. That's good to know. Move it a bit closer. I'm trying to have it quite high up and away from my keyboard because if you listen to this typing noise, it's just the quietest keyboard I've got. So I might need to invest in something a little like a silent keyboard. But I need the mic up a little bit, kind of a weird distance. How's this sound? Is this better? Better for volume? And thanks for watching Last Shogun, by the way. Yeah, better. Slightly better. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can probably put my mic volume up again a little bit higher. This is because I also do. I'm looking for Audacity. I also do podcasting, and my podcasting host, my co-host, does all the editing. And oh my god, no, that's not the right one. Let's try that. Is that better? I need to have my settings quite low for when I'm doing the podcast, otherwise I come across too hot. So this is probably the highest I can take it right now. How's that sound? Better? Okay, cool. We're going to keep it like that then. Yeah, cool. Good. Hey, Foxfire. So, yeah. I'm here to talk about game design. I'm here to talk about my project Pitchfork, which is basically going to be a very low fantasy game, tabletop role-playing game, using the Year Zero engine. I have been working on this already. I've started on it a little bit. I've got a lot of ideas brewing with how I want things to look, but I haven't really started putting it down formally yet. So this isn't quite going from the complete concept phase where I've just got like an elevator pitch and want to kind of take it from there to something else. But I've done a little bit of work on this already. But in terms of showing how this process sort of works, I'm still going to be for all intents and purposes starting with a blank document. So I'm going to be here for 2 hours tonight, walking through how I go about this process. I'm not saying this is the right process, but this is my process. So take that with a pinch of salt if you think you'd want to do, like, if you're interested in doing game design, this is just one way to look at it. And yeah, this is kind of similar to how I did Year Zero Mini, which is a game I've got up on the Drive-Thru RPG store. It's still in beta because I've just finished a playtesting campaign with it, and there's been a lot of good feedback back from that I need to incorporate. But yeah, effectively, this is right now going to be my methodology of bringing a game to life. So the first thing to do, obviously, is create a new document. So I'm just going to fire this up. I like to work in the first thing I do is I look at page setup, and I want to try and keep things looking roughly how I imagine they're going to look as an end product. And what I mean by that is, even though this is very rough notes and everything, I'm still thinking about how much information do I want to put onto one page. And to be able to visualize that, it helps to, even at this early stage, to resize your document to what you think your end size is roughly going to be. Now, I really like my games are all going to be relatively rules light. I'm not going to be putting tons and tons of setting fluff in them, so I don't want to be producing big letter or A4 sized standard books. I want to be producing things that are paperback that you can hold comfortably in one hand. You can flick through and read quite easily. So. Looking at my bookshelf over here, well, really, I'm going to be working with A5. A5 is the kind of international standard for half of A4, which is kind of like half of letter. So this is an A4 sheet of paper, Aquilare character sheet, which I was a player in yesterday. And if I just fold that in half, basically that's A5. So you're kind of looking at a slight like digest, effectively, if you're from the US. So that's what I'm going to do first. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to change my my page to be A5. Margins in inches. I don't like inches. I'm going to have to change that very quickly somehow. Or I can just mess around with it. I think I'm just going to change them to be about half an inch. That's probably more like what I'm looking at. So yeah, this is all just very, very rough stuff. This doesn't really make too much of a difference, but more or less when I'm looking at putting words on a page, this is how I'm going to be going about it. So, more or less standard as it would come. And, yeah, I also want to make it readable because, I'm going to be sharing the link to this document, along with this video. I haven't done it yet, but you're watching live, so it doesn't really matter. But when this does go, when I do make a highlight of this and send it to YouTube, there'll be a link in the comments, both here on Twitch and on YouTube, with a link to this document if you want to have a look at it. But basically, the first thing to do is give it a. I'm still going to be trying to make it readable, so we'll give it a title. We're calling this Pitchfork, and yeah. This is we'll call it alpha 0.1, and we'll put this on a subtitle in the next bit here. That didn't work. Okay, so you may have noticed when I went into Google Docs like this, I had nothing here. It was an empty slate. I have a Google account set up with the Three Skulls Tavern, and I've never used it before. I have a personal Google account, and obviously because of streaming and stuff, I don't want to be showing that because there are some things I'm working on that I'm not supposed to make public. Yeah, so I've created this new one, which means all of my cool settings, my cool fonts I've imported into Google Fonts are not here. So I might be just playing around with that very slightly. The way to do that, if you're using Google Docs, if you want things to look a little bit nicer, you can actually, there's add-ons and things you can use, although this is something that's been added recently, I believe, in normal Google Docs, is that you can play around with your fonts by adding any Google font that you want. So some of the ones I really like, are so for text, I quite like a serif font, and I go generally with this one, I think, Averia Serif Libra. So we're going to pull that one in, and I am Fel. These are all great. This gives a very similar font to hi Attila. This gives a very similar looking font to what you see in Warhammer. The Dominican font. Now, Dominican font is a free font. I use it in a lot of my projects, especially if I'm going for like a fantasy sort of look. It's not a Google font, so this is the closest equivalent that you get in Google Fonts. So this is what I'll be using for headers. I'm just going to select all of them there, hit OK, and that's more or less going to be it. So the title here, what we're going to do is we change it to one of these. I think we'll go with Yeah, why not? Make it bold. Looks a little bit funny pixelation there on it, but whatever. I'm not going to spend too long on this. And then here you can update the title to match what you've just changed it to. So I do that now, and then come back over here. You can see that the title has adopted the font. This one I'm going to also use an IMFL one, but I'm going to make it. I'm not going to make it a bold one. I'm not going to make it all caps, or what do they call that? Sub caps, S caps. Well, anyway, make that italic like that. Okay, and then we'll actually set the subtitle to match that as well. And then for our text, we're going to just go with this new one I downloaded, which is this Avira Light. We're going to go with a bigger font size so you can actually read it. And by the way, if while I'm typing you can't read anything, in fact, I'm going to just boost the view here, because I'm not at full screen, and this way you can actually. And I don't know if I'm streaming in 720p or 1080p right now. If somebody could actually tell me in the chat, that would be helpful. I was messing around with a lot of settings recently. Looks a bit better. Okay. 810p. Interesting. So that's the last setting I'd set it to before I stopped playing around with settings. Pour a beer here. Yeah, cool. So how are people finding this in terms of readability? If I go with normal text and I type in that, you can read all that, I'm assuming, just fine. In fact, I can read it on my mini preview, so it should be okay. Cool, thanks, Asineta. Okay, so the first thing I usually do when I'm coming up with this is I put at the very top of my document the elevator pitch for the game. Now I'm going to open in a different browser, which you can't see offline. I'm going to open the one that I've already come up with, and I'm going to post it in there. And one way you can actually do this first is you can come in here and you can say you can start making headers. So we're going to put this as the introduction. Yeah, and I've seen some people do it like this, where you put like H1 to say this is a first level header. This can help a little bit to find all of your headers when you are going into desktop publishing later, which I'll be covering in later videos. If you kind of label it like this, it doesn't. Most of these desktop publishers, though, they import in your, if you're using a document like this, which I can export in either ODT, which is like an open document standard. Let's see how we go here. So you've got ODT, which is open document format, or you've got the Microsoft Word format, or rich text format. These all save header information. I believe rich text format does it as well. I'm not actually 100% sure on that. But if we do either of these, like ODT, for example, it'll save all this information so that when I paste it into a desktop publisher later, I use Affinity Publisher. It will retain what those are, and then I can play around with how they look in the desktop publisher later. So I'm not going to worry too much about doing like H1 to show that's a level 1 header. I'm actually going to use it as a level 1 header like this. So we're going to give it a nice looking header font like that. We can make it bold, and we're going to update the thingy to match. So I just hit enter, and then I've got normal text here. And of course it is in Arial, which is completely wrong. I didn't update that. Okay, so we're gonna go back here to this light, and then I'm just gonna very quickly here update normal text to match. Yeah, okay, looks good. So I'm gonna paste in here what I've got, which is this. So this is basically my blurb about Pitchfork. It's what the game's about. It's the elevator pitch. If you're thinking of game design principles, this is probably something I should talk about a little bit, because I've done this in the past. One of the recommended ways with designing a game is to think about the big 3 questions. And they are this. If you watched the interview with Tomas actually from Thursday, you'll be familiar with this. But the idea is you ask yourself 3 questions. The first one being, what is your game about? The second question being, what do your characters do in the game? And the final one is, what do your players do in the game? And I kind of try and summarize all this up a little bit and put it into the introduction here. So that's what I've got. So the first thing is, what is my game about? And as you can see here, it's a game designed for low fantasy and historical settings. So I'm kind of making a statement here that this is more like a framework. There will be a kind of implied setting attached to it, but I'm not going to be providing my own Harn world or old world or Symbaroum's Ambra equivalent. This is all going to be very much about, something that you can plug into your favorite kind of low fantasy setting. It focuses on commoners trying to get out of bad situations alive. This isn't easy when the world is determined to keep you mired in the mud. So what I'm kind of saying here is that you're playing commoners. You're going to be expected to be like being put into bad situations, and I've made that last sentence there is kind of giving a little bit of fluff to the pitch by saying this is very much looking at fiefdoms and looking at how serfs were treated in the Middle Ages, and those are the types of people we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at inequality between class, and that's basically how the whole thing is going to be pitched. So the next question we come to is, what do characters do? And that's what this next paragraph's about. Your player character will be confronted with problems that cannot be ignored and will not be solved by your betters. And then a bunch of examples. A family member is wrongfully accused of a heinous crime. An influential noble is performing human sacrifice in the nearby woods. A creature of nightmares lurks in the shadows, picking off the sick and elderly. So those are kind of three little plot hooks that you could use using the game I'm going to be designing. That's kind of in my head what I'm imagining you'd be using this for. These sorts of adventures. There's definitely a sense of thanks. Sounding an awful lot like early editions of early Warhammer Fantasy roleplay. Wolfrup is one of my favorite games. First edition of Wolfrup is how I started playing. Was how I was introduced to Warhammer. So that's no coincidence. This started, in fact, in my head a long time ago. I started thinking about making a Wolfrup clone that didn't use a D100 or the Wolfrup mechanics, because I'm not a huge fan of it. And although I happily will play it and I'll happily run some editions of Wolfrup, the two kind of long-standing game groups I had, both of them had one player in each of them that refused to play D100 games as well. So I couldn't even bring Warhammer to the table for my groups to play, which is actually why I got heavily invested into 3rd edition Warhammer, because it had dice pools. Anyway, that's by the by. This kind of whole concept was started by trying to make a Wolfrup hack. But it's kind of, it's evolved a little bit from there. So there's there should be a Wolfrup feel to this in terms of low-powered Wolfrup, where the idea is you're playing rat catchers, you're playing all the kind of lower, the dung collectors. I can't remember what they're called in that. Gong farmers, what Graham Davis calls them. But yeah, those sorts of careers, right? You're not playing the bounty hunters. There won't be a slayer type of career, that sort of thing. No martial careers at all. No noble career. Although I do have ideas for that in the future. So this, at least what I'm creating here, is going to be very much focused on commoners. I'm not even going to be focusing on criminals. That will be another thing I'm thinking about doing for an expansion or an appendix to this. Because while I want to focus on common careers, there's nothing in the rule set I'm developing that would stop you from playing nobles or warriors or things like that. Okay, the last thing I've mentioned here in the little elevator pitch is the third part of the big three, which is what do players do. And I've kind of, I am plagiarizing ever so slightly from the Year Zero Open Gaming License, OGL. And that's fine. Like, we're allowed to copy and paste from that. So this is the little blurb they put, I kind of reworded it slightly, but this comes from there. And it's basically saying not only do you control your PC, but also the direction of the story. The Game Master provides not just memorable locations and supporting characters, but also difficult challenges with no set solutions, requiring you to use ingenuity to come out alive. So, yeah, that's very generic. It sounds like any role-playing game, right? And that's fine. That's more or less there just for me as a tick the box in my head, more or less. I'm not sure that's going to remain, but it's more a case of saying to people reading this that, okay, as players, there's no funky mechanics in this to make you think that you're not playing a typical role-playing game. This is a typical role-playing game. There will be a game master. I'm making that statement here. The PCs are kind of directing the story, but the game master is there to do all the kind of traditional game mastery stuff. I've also made this point of saying difficult challenges with no set solutions. That's a big part of it. And ingenuity to come out alive is also a big part. Last Shogun in chat is, as you can see, is mentioning about getting rid of martial careers. I am planning on putting in a lot of work into dealing with things outside of combat. So don't worry about that. And also on the flip side, because we don't want to create all these common careers and then have combat rules that are very easy to access and easy to succeed at, right? Because then you're going to have the issue of a peasant running into battle and being quite good at it, which we don't want. So I will be developing my own combat system for this game. I'm taking a big cue from some of the games that BRP games I've been playing recently, most notably Mithras, or Mithras, however you want to pronounce that. But we'll get into that. We'll probably won't get into that today. We'll probably get into that a little bit later. But yeah, that's a good point to bring up, that the focus of this is not going to be on combat, but combat needs to be, in my opinion, and how I'm going to be developing this, combat needs to be something that I'm focusing fairly heavily on to make sure that if players engage with combat, it's got to be deadly, right? Because you wouldn't expect commoners to have... I'm kind of going into the weeds a little bit, but the idea behind commoners is they're not very wealthy. They're not kitted normally for fighting, so you wouldn't expect them to have swords or maces or things like this. You might expect them to have a pitchfork, hence the name, or other tools that they're using for their occupations. But the idea here is, I want for people to feel competent at combat. It needs to be a combination of having the right equipment, so that means armor and it means weapons, and the relevant skills. And we'll get to the skills bit. That's probably something we're going to touch on a little bit today. And the idea behind this is I eventually want to do a life path generation system for this game. There will be a skill to do with fighting, but because you're playing commoners, you're not going to really be able to take a life path that's going to give you, or maybe there'll be one life path potentially that'll give you like maybe one skill point in something like melee. If you're playing a hunter, then you would have potentially a marksmanship, like levels in marksmanship, because you'd be used to shooting, game, that sort of thing. Yeah. So conscription. Yeah. Last Shogun's talking about conscription and mass combat. That will probably be something for a later expansion. I have thought a little bit about this with militias and things. However, the focus of the game, the stories we're going to be telling with this game, which is what I've put in here, is you're focused on small problems within your community, right? It's not about going to war for your liege lord or being conscripted, that sort of thing. Of course, that would be a part of life, and that would be something I would be wanting to look into later. But that would be something I'm also... So one of the expansions I'm planning on doing later is actually a martial expansion. So if people want to play, I'll be introducing careers, or whatever I call them, for martial types. So it'd be your typical warriors and bounty hunters, that sort of thing. And I would be putting in rules for mass combat and conscription and militia, so that you could theoretically play with... if you'd started playing in like a standard Pitchfork game focused on your community, the GM could use this expansion to introduce into the story where your liege lord is conscripting peasants to fight in a battle that he's in a war or something that he's fighting. And that way you could seamlessly go from one adventure into this new kind of narrative direction, and the rules would be able to support mass combat. So that is something I would be looking at, but again, definitely not initially. So yeah, how will a commoner learn those skills? Yeah, they don't have time for that. That's where the life path generation system is going to come into play here. Also, how it's going to be... This is something I need to think about with advancement. I've done a lot of playing around with advancement in various other games. We'll get to that in terms of learning a new skill. So part of me wants to do something similar to the BRP model, also the Burning Wheel model, what I've done in Year Zero Mini, which is as you use skills, you basically learn from doing, right? So the only way you would be able to learn a melee skill is if you're actually getting into a fight yourself and learning something about it, because I think that makes sense logically. I don't want it to be if you're using a skill, you tick it and then you can spend XP on that later, something like that. Okay, right. So I'm gonna try and crack on a little bit with this. So the next thing I do when I'm looking at this is I try and well, there's two ways you can go with this, right? One way, if you're starting straight from scratch, and this is what I tend to do, but I've already done this, so I'm kind of skipping this step a little bit. Is I do a bit of a brainstorming session where I will usually use something like Evernote. In fact, that is what I use, Evernote. I will, anytime something pops into my head, I'll let something stew for a week or two as I think about what I want from this game. And I'll put little ideas or little mechanics I think I want to implement, and I'll just throw them in almost as bullet form into an Evernote document. And so I have a kind of rough idea generally of the direction I want to take the game in. I might not have any detail beyond that. I might just say I want to have 4 skills per attribute. Remember, this is a year 0 game, so I'm kind of sticking with some of the conventions with that. But yeah, I might be saying on my notes, I might be saying 16 skills, 4 attributes, something like that. Or I might say 4 attributes and unlinked skills. Or I might be saying 6 skills or more than 4 skills if I want to go that direction. I might even put down a list. I might even start playing around with names of skills, attributes or skills or whatever I want. So that's some of the sort of stuff I'll do offline. And then basically when I've got that done and I'm ready to start putting something together, I'll come here into a Word document, God, I haven't used this term in a long time, a word processor. And I will start trying to put my ideas down. And the way I do this to help me organize my thoughts is the first thing I do is I put together an outline of what I want to be creating. And the way I do that, I'm going to zoom out very slightly here because I'm going to be doing a lot of page breaks, is I start thinking about, so the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to put in insert a page break. This helps with readability, not just for me, but if I want anybody to proofread this afterwards. It's usually easier if you kind of think about that as you're going, so that you don't have to do an extra step later. Hey, Ed. Yeah, so first thing I'm doing here is I've got an introduction as my first header. The next header I'm going to do is, again, I'm sticking with the Open Gaming License format. I poured a beer. I haven't drunk any of it yet. So let me just finish pouring and then have a quick sip. In fact, I'm going to bring it up because that's probably more useful. So here's the Year Zero engine OGL. Skip past all the bit at the front there, but basically this, what you're looking at here, this is the outline layout that tends to follow all the Year Zero engine games. So this is what I'm going to be roughly using here. So introduction is the first one, which I've already got. Then we're going to be looking at player characters. So I'm just going to call it your commoner. It's also something they kind of do in their own games. They say like your whatever. So make this a header. You can see here you have an auto-generated outline on the left, so you can kind of jump through things very, very quickly and easily. So one of the things, there's quite a few little things like this I really like about Google Docs. The other thing I really like is that I have an Android phone, which means it works really well natively on a phone. So if I want to add something to it, I want to work on it, and I'm away from home, I can very easily do it on my phone. So we'll put some text in there later. Do another page break, and the next section is skills. Now the skills section in the Year Zero engine is also like the general rules of play. Everything's kind of tied to skill rolls, so skills and rules is kind of how that section works. So that's how I'll be doing it as well. TBC. Now here's where I'm going to go off-piste a little bit. The next section is talents. And I'm possibly not going to be using talents. So I'm going to put talents in here anyway with a question mark. If you see some odd spelling mistakes, like I put in that, for example, I mentioned at the beginning of this stream when probably not everybody was in here, I live in Germany, and because I work for my day job, which is all in German, I've bought a German keyboard, and I've incorporated, my brain is now completely focused on the Q, not QWERTY, but QWERTZ. It's like QUERTZ. The Z and the Y have been switched on a German keyboard. And there's also all the umlaut letters and the SZ and that sort of thing. So I'm used to using that. But my keyboard is really loud, so I've swapped it from my old British keyboard, and that's why I might be getting some things wrong, like not remembering where things like question marks are. Anyway. Okay, this will be a header as well. Go to the next section. The music stopped. Just really quiet. There, it's picking up a little bit. So after talents, we've got combat and damage. Again, I want combat to be something very specific. But for now, I'm just going to say conflict. Because this is the chapter about conflict. And I want to include things like mental conflict, insanity rules, that sort of thing, because I think that's very important when you're playing common people. And that's, if we look at, get rid of that. If we look at the table of contents from the Year Zero engine, that's basically what they've given us. That's what I've copied. And then there's a point where I would come to think about, is there anything else I want to add to that for this that's necessary for this game? Because that's kind of the bare minimum as far as I'm concerned. And this is where I will start thinking about things like equipment. So I think equipment's going to be really important to this game. But to give a nod to Warhammer, I'll probably just for now call it trappings. Then we're going to look at right, are there any other sections I would want to write about for this game? So thinking about other games in the Year Zero engine kind of group, I could put in here a chapter on journeying, for example. One of my other games I'll be working on definitely will feature traveling rules, but this isn't so much like that. This isn't a game about survival in the wilderness as you're hex crawling across a map. You are tied to your fief. You are pledged to a liege lord if you're a peasant, or if you're a commoner, you're probably financially tied to a town, the town that you call home, unless you're some sort of like a peddler or something like that. So yeah. Traveling isn't really going to be. It is not going to. I might talk about it a little bit in the game somewhere, but I'm not going to have a whole chapter devoted to journeying rules for Pitchfork. Other things you can think about are strongholds, or in Mutant Year Zero they have the Ark. So is base building a thing in this? No, again, it's really not. However, your village, your town that you live in is going to be important. I think having setting up links with NPCs for the player characters when you're starting off, similar to what they do in Mutant Year Zero, I think would be a very useful thing to do. So I think putting a chapter in here on your settlement, I've got to think of how to call it, is something that I would definitely want to be doing, and providing some guidance around like how you would do that and how you flesh that out. Yeah, the town. But it's not really a town, right? So if we're calling it Pitchfork, you're assuming this is in the countryside. There isn't really a town. It'd be a village or villages tied to a fief. I mentioned setting at the beginning, Astonata, Tony. I'll just scroll up to the top here. It's designed for low fantasy and historical settings and focuses on commoners trying to get out of bad situations alive. And when I say historical, I probably should expand this slightly. Anyway, I don't want to restart. I don't want to start scrubbing all this because that's actually not the point of this exercise. The point of this exercise is to start putting some bones on things, right? But the idea here is it's either going to be low fantasy or it's going to be medieval Europe, specifically. Yep, exactly. Yeah. So think of your favorite low fantasy setting, or just try and think of Harnmaster, something like that, or Aquilare, for example. That's a perfect example. Astonata is the GM for the Aquilare game that I was playing in yesterday, so he knows exactly what I'm talking about here. Anyway, so yeah, we'll call it, for now, we'll just call it the town. Okay, and then I'm going to add another one. I think we're nearly done here. I'll probably do a chapter about I mentioned I would produce a very light setting. Nobody has seen this yet because it hasn't gone live, but we've reviewed Best Left Buried this morning, and one of the things I quite like about it is that it's also designed to be used with any kind of OSR setting. So it doesn't have a huge amount of setting fluff, although it's implied throughout the game. And I'd like to do something similar. They have a chapter. The author has created a chapter for the setting. It's only like a dozen pages, and it just kind of covers some very high level things, like here are the duchies in this specific example, the 13 duchies. Here are it's about dungeon delving, which they call crypt digging. So the crypts, there's like another dozen crypts listed. There are the important NPCs in the setting, and that's more or less it, right? But each of them has like a paragraph or two paragraphs of a description and some plot hooks and things to deal with it. So it's basically really easy to just grab a hold of that if you want to, quickly do something for a one shot, lift some of the ideas out and just plug it into the setting that you want. And I think that's exactly what I want to do here. So for this one, I'm just going to say like the realm, right? So this is the world that surrounds the one I'm going to be creating for this, whatever it's going to look like. The unequal world of Pitchfork. Okay, and last but not least, I think we'll do one more one, and then we'll call this adversaries, right? I don't want to forget about, how this works. And I've got some ideas here. Also going to be influenced a little bit by Best Left Buried because they've done some very cool stuff with that. Okay, and I think we're probably good there. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Talents might come out as a chapter, but I might replace it with something else. Depends on whether I'm going to use talents or not. So Transvalar. Sorry, I missed that game's name. Which game? Perhaps rules for how the town survives, a bit like a mix of Mutant Year Zero and Pendragon. Yeah, I mean that can go in the town chapter. That town chapter can have all that kind of information, I think. I guess the only other thing I would put in here is I don't really necessarily want to put a published adventure, although I guess I could, but bearing in mind this is a playtest document, I need to think about this. This is quite important actually, because I want to be creating something here that when I'm finished with it, it gives me a document that I can use to playtest the game. So I need to have kind of a rough idea of how the mechanics work. I need to have a rough idea on how the setting works, and I need to have a rough idea on the types of stories being told with this game. So that's the final piece in the puzzle. Is going to be for now we'll just call it Adventure Seeds. Yeah, it might be one single adventure, like a playtest adventure. It could be, a few pages with like one page adventure hooks, that sort of thing. They're a little bit more detailed. Oh, Best Left Buried, sorry. Best Left Buried, yeah, that's the game that I reviewed earlier this morning with Liam on Mud and Blood. Okay, so that's it. So that's the first step I do. I come up with the kind of overall chapter structure for what I want to be doing. Again, nothing is set in stone. This is just to help me get my thoughts a little bit structured while I'm starting to put words down. I'll move stuff around potentially. I'll add chapters, take chapters out. Doesn't really matter at this stage. At this stage, I'm just trying to think about what are the things I want to be talking about with this. So yeah, cool. Next step I would be usually doing here would be to do a little bit more outlining, and this is where I would look at the Year Zero OGL, right? Because I don't want to be reinventing the wheel. I'm borrowing heavily from the Year Zero games, and borrowing from their mechanics, borrowing from their ways of doing things. Their introduction, I've read this a few times, so that's why I'm kind of skipping through it fairly quickly. The introduction here is more about an introduction to Year Zero engine games, and I don't need that now. I might be borrowing some of this for a final quick start version of this game. But for now, for the playtest, I absolutely don't need any of this. It's just saying, why would you want to use the Year Zero engine? And for now, again, I'm going to be playtesting this. I might ask a few people who are already familiar with this or might be watching these videos to play it as well. So I don't need to sell them on it necessarily. It's going to be people who are offering or interested in it who are going to be trying to do that. So this will come at a later stage when I'm basically talking about why you'd want to run this game. I could absolutely put that in now, but I want to kind of focus on the core at this stage. So, you could put in the introduction, be talking about, what is a role-playing game, which is this bit here. You could talk about how dice, what kind of dice you need, the character sheets, that sort of thing. Thanks, Ed, for coming around. No worries. So that's the introduction, right? It tells you about what the Year Zero engine's about. It tells you what you need to play it. It tells you what a role-playing game is. Again, I don't need any of that for this, so I'm going to be leaving that. That's kind of my introduction mainly done. What I will be putting in my introduction, if I go back to it, other than having my blurb here, is I might be putting in here something about playtest feedback. Okay, so in here I would be basically asking people to play test, like, please, if you're playing this game, send feedback to me at these links, and I'll provide hyperlinks to an email address. I'll probably create a Google form for people to do like quick, like multiple choice feedback, that sort of thing, and like some boxes to put some text in, that sort of thing. I've done that with the Year Zero Mini, and it I did get like kind of 4 or 5 forms filled out. So I might do something like that. Anyway, but for all the stuff I have there, hold on. So heading 2, got to select the heading first. Then I'm going to change the font, and I'm going to make it, how big is this one? 20. And bold, this one's not bold. That looks all right. One other thing about headers, this is more of a personal choice, but you don't generally want to create lots and lots of levels of nested headers. It's generally considered bad graphic design or desktop publishing design. So ideally you want to stick to kind of 2 headers, ideally. Now, what I have here, if you consider the level 1 headers are my chapter headers, this level 2 header is kind of my first level header. So I would be going with this, and what I would imagine I would do is I'd have this level here, which would be my top level headers within the chapter, and then under that I would have one more, which would be the level 3 in here. And I don't know how to differentiate those. It doesn't really matter how I have them look here, as long as they're fairly obvious that we're in a new header, right? And I just usually have them going down in size very slightly, so I can tell when one is bigger and one is smaller. In fact, just to make it a little bit more obvious, we'll go ahead and make this into SC. Is it small caps? I think it's small caps, like that. So it just looks a little bit different to the other header. And I'm going to make it bigger too, because it is a chapter header after all. So we're going to make this heading 1. And that means I can make this to have a little bit more differentiation between the two. I can actually make this a little bit bigger. 18. Wow, it's very close. See the other options I've got here. That's a bit more condensed. That looks sufficiently different enough that you can tell they're different types of headers. So we'll stick with that one there, which is what's that one called? DW Pika, whatever that means. Okay, so playtest feedback is something I would be adding to this introduction section. Nothing else really necessarily at this stage. So for the commenter, this is going to be a big section, right? This is generally in Year Zero games. This is where you have character creation rules. It talks about the elements of a character sheet. That's going to be hard to come up with without a character sheet, and that's something we'll probably be talking about in a future video. But for now, I definitely know the things I want to be talking about. Like I'm going to want a section on talking about the various career options. I'm going to want something talking about the attributes that are available, the skills, like introducing them, what they are, that sort of thing. The skills chapter will go into a lot more detail for each skill that I come up with. This will be a skill-based game. Each skill will have a section, almost probably a page each often, detailing what that skill's about, what you can use it for, how would you specialize in it, that sort of thing. So for now, I am going to think about how I want to do this. I probably want to start with character creation, right? So I'll give it like a little summary. Character character creation summary. Again, none of these are necessarily going to stay named like this. This is just so I know what I'm talking about. After we've done some character creation, this is where it starts getting a bit tricky. So I think here we would do steps. I'm not going to fill this up, but we'll do steps in character creation. And if I want to do a life path system, this is where I would start doing, step 1, step 2, etc. So the first thing you're doing after you've read the introduction is you're creating a character. And my inclination here is to do life path system for this. And this would be, I would expand this then out to be, step 1. I'm assuming, again, I didn't put this in the beginning, I'm assuming this is going to be an all-human setting. But because I also want to be hacking Wolfrip a little bit, I will be including fantasy races of a low fantasy nature. So I won't be putting elves in this. Although I could probably be convinced to do otherwise. Because I know if Charlotte's actually watching still. She's a big fan of elves. Whereas I'm not so much. Okay, so so I do things like I might do race if we're going to be thinking about race, and how that impacts on your life path. Your parents, your upbringing, so what kind of career your parents had, which is very important in a low fantasy setting where you're a commoner, because in those types of worlds or settings, children would be helping out with their parents' occupation from a fairly young age. So there would be some expectation that your starting skills, your starting attributes would be heavily influenced by your parents' occupation. So that would be one of the first steps. Then we'd probably talk around apprenticeships. Maybe I don't know what level I want to go into this with the life path. That's something again I'll be doing in a future video. But yeah, things like that. Thinking about, what level of granularity do I want for this? Do I want a more broad life path generation system where it's you're just rolling on a few tables and you're up and running and getting a character fairly quickly? Or do I want something more like Traveler or Harnmaster or Aquilare or Mithras, where you're rolling on lots of different things, kind of building your character from childhood through to when the adventure starts, and you kind of... Which I love. I love that. And I'm definitely going to put something like that in here, I think. It's just a question of whether I'm also going to do quicker character creation options as well. Probably do both eventually. So steps in character creation. So that's all going to go through how that works. After the character creation is done, let's look at the OGL, see what they do here. So they talk about the various... In fact, I'm just probably going to copy a lot of this stuff here, right? So they talk about the 10 steps of creation. Right? You choose your archetype, you decide on your age, you spend points on your attributes, spend points on your skills, talents, choose your big dream, blah, 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 pick your gear, etc. Okay, so we're going to stick with that, I think. So we're going to say here, character creation summary, steps in life path. In fact, you know what? I think life path is going to be such a big thing. I might probably follow suit with Forbidden Lands and include a life path generation system in an appendix, because it's going to be more involved. It's not for everyone, but it's definitely worth thinking about. So we're going to stick with the tried and true typical Year Zero format here for creating characters fairly quickly. And I'm going to go down to the bottom of this document. I'm going to add another section here, and I'm going to call this Appendix 1 Life Path. My microphone is getting in the way of my monitor. I'll have to think about that in the future. I've got this laid out. Okay, so this is just to remind me that I want to do it, and this is how I just need it there. That I want to address it. I want to address it later in a separate section. So for now, and again, I can change any of this if I want to at a future time. But just to get things kind of down and how I want them, this is how I'm going to do this. So first thing is to think about an archetype. Again, I'm going to be going with a lot of Wolfrip conventions while I'm doing this, so that's why I'm calling it career rather than archetype. The next thing they talk about is age, attributes, skills, and talents. So we're going to go with age, TBC, attributes. In fact, I can just do all these at one go. Skills, talents, question mark. Because again, I don't know if I'm keeping talents. relationships, gear, encumbrance, appearance, name, experience. Okay, cool. Age, attributes, skills. Okay, I think we're going to call this personality. And this is where you would have things like motivation, problem, personal problem, relationships. Etc. Yeah. Yeah. Then we're going to look at trappings. Tied into trappings, we're going to have encumbrance, of course. And this usually... So this chapter about your commoner, generally in Year Zero engine games, as you can see here, you generally have the encumbrance detailed in that chapter, straight after you start talking about gear. And the reason for that is because gear is very important in the Year Zero engine games. That was a strange noise that just popped up. Christ, that was a bit spooky, actually. I just heard somebody like opening a bottle. It sounded like really loud in my ear from this watch together end of the video. Anyway, trappings, encumbrance. I was talking about encumbrance. They tend to do it there. I'll do it like this for now. I might actually move encumbrance into the trappings chapter. But for now, I can just give a quick overview of it. Consumables are something I love, and I'm definitely going to be including in this. Appearance, name, and experience. I'd probably put them before trappings, actually. So we're going to go with appearance. And we're going to actually put the name. I think having a name is kind of an important step. I quite like coming up with a name early on when I'm creating something, but this can be moved around. It doesn't really matter too much. Just put it down here for now. Okay, and these are all level 2 headers, so I'm going to give them all the level 2 heading. I don't know why they jumped onto the next page. That's very odd. Okay, that did not work at all. Why did that not work? Let's try this then. Okay, I don't know why that's working. Anywho. Yeah. So this is effectively the entire first chapter laid out in terms of what the sort of stuff I want to talk about, right? Pretty straightforward. It's not taking me very. I'm about an hour into the stream. You're probably going to learn very quickly if you're watching this for any length of time that I have a little bit of OCD when it comes to things like having everything on one line. I will be doing this even though this is meant to be rough. There's some things that I just I have to have a certain way because my brain just gets really focused on it and gets annoyed if it doesn't get put right. So yeah, is what it is. I like to say my wife loves that character trait about me, but she really doesn't. Alrighty. Sorted. First chapter then we have second chapter, I guess technically. Look at this. We've got a nice little nested, top level header summary for what we're having in this chapter. I'm probably gonna do it for every skill, every chapter. It might take up the entire video, so I'll probably just do one more. We'll look at this as an example. So, where are we? Skills. I guess we click on it. That's the easy way to do it. So in the skills chapter, the first thing they do is they mention the we'll just call it skill list. So list out at the very beginning. These are the skills that you have. In fact, I'm going to open something else as well. I'm going to actually open a Year Zero engine game. So let me quickly... Give me a sec. I think we'll open Forbidden Lands. Why not? It's one of the later ones. No, we'll open Vaesen, actually. I really like Vaesen. It's the newest game. We've got a beta. So here it is. And we're going to be looking at it here, right? So this is the table of contents for Vaesen. Vaesen is a monster hunting game in the 18th century. It's really cool. Set in Scandinavia. So Nordic horror. But yeah, it has, as you can see here, has the same layout I've been following from the OGL. We've got the introduction. We've got your player character, skills, talents, conflict and injuries. Then we start... those are the 5 chapters that were in the OGL. Then we start diverging from that and making it specific to the game. And in this one, the society and the headquarters, so your base basically is the next chapter there. Then it starts talking about the world around it, the setting. Then it talks about this is basically a bestiary. So this is the creatures you're gonna encounter, the Vaesen. The mystery is the adventure side of things, and then a sample adventure. So pretty straightforward in terms of what's included there. And this is exactly going to fit in with what I'm coming up with now. However, we don't see a really this is a very high level table of contents, right? There's not a lot of nested things in here. However, there are lots of headers, so we're going to jump in there and have a look at what they've done. So the first thing that we've got here, they've got a little blurb about how skills work. Skill tests, they have a summary of the skills here. So when I put skill list into the header there, this is basically what I'm talking about, is kind of an introduction. So I should probably say how skills work rather than a list. And that would include having a list of the skills, because I already know how to do that. Let's bring it up again. Then we start getting into the nitty gritty of how skills work, right? So, yeah, sorry, you can see it here at the top here, Vaesen. I'll just quickly show you the Kickstarter for it. Yeah, it's not out yet. It's coming out in August, I believe, for general release. If you just type in Vaesen Kickstarter into a browser, I was a Kickstarter backer for it, so that's why I've got a beta PDF. But here you can see it had 4,000 backers. It raised, this is Swedish krona, so 2.7 million is basically 270,000 euros. And yeah, anyway, if you want to look it up and have a look at it, it's a really cool game. One of my favorite Year Zero engine games, although I haven't read it in detail yet. But the rules are very streamlined, have just the right amount of crunch. There's a lot of things I really like about it. So that's what I'm looking at. And that's why I'm looking at it, is also because what tends to happen with Free League games is they tend to they're always iterating on stuff that's come before. Forbidden Lands, for example, was the first game of theirs that came out with a consumable dice, and they used these polyhedrals. So it's a D6 game normally, but they provided 3 additional polyhedrals, a D8, a D10, and a D12, to track consumables, like it's done in Black Hack. And then when Alien came out, the next game, Alien also had consumables, but they did it with a D6 dice pool, so it kind of removed the need to have an additional set of dice. And I actually really like that method. It's the method that's actually included here in the Year Zero OGL as well, so that's become the kind of default now. And generally, every new game that comes out with them, they're iterating on previous rules they've done, kind of massaging them, making them fit for the setting. And in my head, I've been playing and running and following Free League since their very first game in English anyway, Mutant Year Zero. So I'm kind of familiar with all of them. I've been looking at them all as they've come out, and I get more and more excited by every new game that comes out, because I kind of love the innovation that's going into each of these, and how they're taking their fairly simple base system and putting these very interesting tweaks in place. And it's quite inspiring for me as well, as a tinkerer, to get in there and do my own tinkering and kind of giving it a test to see how modular it really is. So anyway, yeah, so that's Vaesen. That's why I'm looking at it in the beta, because it's their latest game. We only have the beta, and yeah, it's going to be probably a month before backers get the full version. So what they're doing here is within skill tests, it's talking about all the various elements that go into how you roll dice. It's talking about what happens when you fail. It's talking about how you push the roll. It talks about conditions. It's got your chances of success as a table in here, which is really important. How helping works, parallel actions, levels of difficulty in this game, which is not in every Year Zero game. So you can actually require numbers of successes. How opposed rolls work, how advantage works, how equipment comes into play with skill rolling, and what extra successes mean. And then you've got all of the skills laid out. I like this. It's actually fairly brief compared to some of the other ones I've seen. In fact, if I just look at this, they've got, on 6 pages, they've got all of the rules you need for skill tests, which is a lot less than, for example, Forbidden Lands, which is the first game I was about to open. So we're going to use this as a kind of template, I think, in terms of headers, right? So yeah, I'm going to skip the bit that talks about means and ends. I can always add to this, but really I want to be talking about what does it mean to roll the dice. So let's look at how they do it here first. They have a section called Roll the Dice. Different colors. We're not going to be doing different colors. We're not going to be doing Mutant Year Zero or Forbidden Lands system. That's not what I'm planning on doing. But we want to talk about like what does it mean when you roll the dice? And this is what I put here with how skills work. I think we're going to probably follow suit with this and say skill tests, because how skills work is kind of not very elegant. So skill tests. The next section I'm going to put in now. This is a high level section, so I'm going to be putting, again like Vazen does, I'm going to be putting sections in here underneath it. So the first thing we'll talk about are an overview of the skills. So we're going to put a skill list in here. New level. Let's put it at, what's this one called? So we're going to copy that. Wow. Okay, never mind. Is that one? I like how it's gray. That actually helps set it apart a little bit. We're going to make it bold so it stands out from the normal text. And we're going to just... I guess we're going to keep it at 14. Let me see, it's at 100. Oh, this is a different... That's a different text in the introduction. Let's gonna call it normal text. There we go. That looks a bit different. I'm not even sure I like that. I quite like that IMFL double Pika, actually. So I think we're gonna just do that. The problem with this is that it's gonna be interfering a little bit. Oh, let's try it. So we're gonna do this. We're gonna say normal text. We're not gonna adopt. Oops. We're going to adopt that as. Oh God. Update to match that. So you can see these have all changed a little bit. It's gone down to 10 points in terms of font size, which again. Whoops. Let's go back to skills here. The skill list. Yeah, so even though this is font size 10, it's not that different from this one. So for this one, I think what we're going to do, I like the gray. I like it not being too big. I think with this one, I might just make it small caps. Looks like shit, so we're not going to do that. No 16 points, so we'll do it manually. There we go. Not great. Yeah. I don't like any of these. French Canon SC. Nah. Nope. That'll do. Okay. So let me just update that to match, because I'm going to be using quite a few of these level 3 headers now. Okay, cool. So we're going to talk about the skill list. Let's get back on track here. the next thing we're going to talk about are, so we have here the 12 core skills. Other skills, that's a little call out box. We don't need that. Rolling the dice is something we want to talk around. So rolling the dice. So this is very specific to the Forbidden Lands dice in the OGL. So it kind of assumes you're going to be using Forbidden Lands dice. I'm not using them, but still 6s mean success. So I think what I want to talk about is, I mean, it's a good little section header. 6s mean success. And tying in with that, I will probably, because I've done this in Year Zero Mini, I'll probably have a little section. This section will talk about what success means. It'll talk about what failure means. But we'll still do another section here. The art of failure. So how to make failure interesting and not just have it stall the game. So whether that means a kind of limited version of failing forward or something else, that's what we'll be talking about around that. So 6s mean success. What does failure mean? When you're rolling the dice, the other thing we want to talk about is, I guess I would go in there when you're rolling the dice. So things like, describing your action, the GM telling you which skill to roll, that sort of thing would all go in there. Okay. We want to talk about chances of success. That's important. You said this to me. Pushing is an important element of dice rolling, so pushing your roll. So let's stop it there for a second and have a quick look at what they got in here. See how close I was. Rolling without skill, that'll go under the rolling the dice. The art of failure, okay, so that was in my head probably because I've been looking at this a lot. 6s mean success, art of failure, chance of success, okay. Pushing your roll. Did I put something else in there? No, so pushing your roll, cool, I'm kind of sticking with that. Pushing your roll gets its own kind of higher level section because in pushing your roll is a very major part of all of the Year Zero games, but in Forbidden Lands and Mutant Year Zero, it's a bit more crunchy because you have to kind of look at the ones on certain dice, and they fuel willpower points or mutation points. I'm not going to be doing that at all. I'm not sure exactly. I've got some ideas for how I want to do pushing here, but I'm not going to be going that level of crunch on this. So I don't need that. I just need a single section under this this bit here where we're just talking about how pushing works. In fact, if we look at Vaesen, how Vaesen does it, it's probably going to be similar to what I'm going to be doing. And indeed, Vaesen just has 2 paragraphs, and under it, broken to succeed is another one, and that's it, right? Story must go on is about failing forward. But in fact, I'm probably going to be using the same pushing mechanic that Vaesen uses. Vaesen, basically, the way it works is you have 2 types of trauma. You have physical trauma and you have mental trauma. And they're very simple. You have 3, they're like 3 slots. They're named, they have like descriptions of what they mean, and 3 for each. So if you get attacked and you take 2 damage, you're marking 2 of those traumas, if you will. And each time you have one, it adds a negative modifier to any roll dealing with that type, any physical roll if you have physical trauma, or any mental roll if you have mental trauma. So it's pretty brutal. As soon as you start taking damage, your capabilities are reduced. I love that. It's really easy to track. And the flip side of that, to the way that pushing is handled, if you're able to read that with the small text, pushing basically, if you want to push a roll, if it's a physical roll, so you're using either physique or coordination. I'm not sure actually what they call it. Physique or precision are the two physical attributes. So if you're using either of those 2 physical attributes and you want to push your roll, you will be taking 1 physical trauma to push, and that comes into play after you've rolled the dice. So the idea is that you've pushed yourself to try and make this thing succeed, and you've hurt yourself in the process. And likewise with wits and empathy, which are the 2 mental attributes, if you try and push yourself mentally in some way, then you're going to take some you have to take one mental trauma as a result. I love that. It's very simple. It's very easy to describe. It keeps things really nice and gritty. It'll work really well with whatever I come up in Pitchfork for trauma. So we're going to stick with that. All that to say, I mean, I don't need to really have an idea for how that works, but all that to say, I don't need more than just a single header here for the pushing and roll section. Okay, so let's look back at Vaesen actually, because that's kind of what I want. Conditions. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm gonna have conditions. I might do. So we'll put conditions in here with a question mark, so I know it's not 100% how I feel about that yet. What else do I want to talk about? There's not a lot left, I don't think. What do they have here in the OGL? So pushing your roll, you only get one chance to roll. Yeah. Group rolls, modificate. Okay, so that was all in Vaesen as well. So I'll just use this. Levels of difficulty. I'm not sure I'm going to be doing that, but I might. I have been considering whether I want to do this. Generally, it's not something I like. It's not. One of the things I really like about the Year Zero engine is that you just need a single 6 on your dice pool to succeed. But this being a more brutal game, this being a game where you're playing commoners, I have to think of ways to keep the dice pool down so that player characters aren't too powerful, or I look at doing something like for harder tasks where you're outside of your kind of, I don't know, just tasks that are harder. You need more than one success. You might need 2 or you might need 3. So I think this could be something where it might be needed. The other big game I'm working on, which is a kind of post-apocalyptic game called Mousepunk. That would definitely be a bit more. Yeah, I would probably not be using this at all. In fact, it's not even a question. I would definitely not be using levels of difficulty, because the idea is you're a little bit more capable in that game. So we're gonna have a think. We're gonna probably put this in levels of difficulty. If people are wondering why I'm not so sure about conditions, by the way, it's mainly because conditions add a certain level of crunch to the game, and I want to try and keep this relatively rules light. So while they are quite good at modeling things like hunger, thirst, that sort of thing, I think they're generally more applicable in games that focus on where you're exposed to extreme things on a regular basis, where you are traveling, you're doing lots of journeying, that sort of thing. And again, that's not the idea for this. So conditions will probably be taken out, but I'm leaving it there for now because, yeah, just for something you think about later. Getting help from other players or other characters. Parallel actions. Parallel actions isn't in every one of their games, but yeah, this is basically talking about, as you can see here, you probably can't read it, but things like if everybody's doing the same thing. So if everybody's sneaking, how do you do that? In Forbidden Lands, for example, if everybody's sneaking, the person with the worst level of skill rolls, and if they fail, then obviously they've been heard. And that's kind of generally how it works. In here, it's basically saying it's coming straight after helping each other, and it's saying when you're all doing the same action, you can't help each other. So each of you have to pass your own test without assistance. And that's all it says. But it does say if you pass with more than one success, you can pass some of your successes on to help someone as an extra success, which I guess is on the next page. It says see extra successes. Extra successes. Helping each other player characters have failed the same kind of skill test. Doesn't really say what that means, but I think what that means is if someone fails and you got 2 successes, then you can consider that both of you have succeeded. Yeah, that's that might not be, brutal and grimdark enough for what I'm trying to come up with here. So I don't know how I feel about that, but I'll put it in anyway for now because I like the thinking about it. So I'm basically gonna copy what they got here in Vaesen. I'm gonna go levels of difficulty, helping, and parallel actions. Levels of difficulty, helping each other, and parallel actions. Again, I'm going to stop after this I'm going to stop doing this activity after I finished with the skill chapter. I'm nearly done with the skill chapter as well, and then I'm going to start putting some information into the actual your character chapter, like the things that I want, and start thinking about that. So this won't be much longer. We'll spend the rest of the stream, the rest of this video doing that. So parallel actions was one, was the last one I had there. Already got chances of success covered. Opposed roles are really important. We're going to put that in. How advantage and disadvantage work. We definitely want to cover that too. How equipment comes into play. I'm probably not going to put that in as a separate section. Equipment is handled slightly differently in Vaesen to some of the other games. It's quite abstract. I'm not sure I want to do equipment yet. I'm kind of feeling, because I want combat to be very deadly, to try and put people off of fighting all the time. In Vaesen, you're expected to be monster hunters. So although it's a gritty, deadly system, things like equipment there doesn't have a lot of crunch around it. So combat can kind of feel a little bit more loose and narrative, which is cool. But I actually want something to feel a little bit more simulationist, deadly, and brutal in Pitchfork. So I think I'm actually going to be putting a lot more crunch around equipment, and I don't need it here. So we're going to go with opposed rolls advantage, and I'm going to leave it extra successes as well. I'll put it in because I'm not sure how I actually want to handle that yet. So opposed rolls advantage and parallel. No, extra successes. Cool. And that's nearly as done. The last thing to look at is just putting it in there that I want to have a section about the skills at another level. And I think they just called it the skills too. Yeah, the skills. And then basically, as you can see here, there's a section for each skill talking about what you can do with it, what extra successes mean when you're rolling it. So the skills, TBC. And that is the sub-level kind of outline for the skills chapter done. That's a heading level 2, because it's the next one. And there we go. Okay, so I'm going to go back now. So effectively, what I would probably do if I was doing this on my own is I would probably do a similar exercise for every chapter. I'd look at what's in the OGL, I'd look at existing Year Zero engine games, and just to try and get the outline out of my head, or start thinking about it and how I want the game to be organized, I'd be doing something like this. It's worth pointing out, bear in mind that I'm trying to create here a playtest, a rough and ready playtest. This is quite a lot of detail for that. I think I could quite easily come up with scrubbing the notes that I've already got in Evernote and putting them in 3 or 4 pages, very, very roughly laid out and everything like that. But I am planning on creating this as a game I will be selling in future, and as a result, I want to do this in a slightly more organized fashion. And what that does mean is, when I have the playtest, I might have a number of headers that just have a TBC, and I don't mind having that. It's just something I know I need to think about later. But for this point in time, it's just a reminder that I have a section that I want to think about, but it's not important for the playtest. So yeah. This might not, if you're thinking about doing a similar exercise about coming up with a playtest document for your own game, you don't need to go to this level of detail necessarily. But this is the way I like to do it. I've done it before, and it worked well. It does take a little bit more time, all things considered, to actually get a playtest document together. But I think for the purposes of what we're doing here as well, it's going to help show my thought processes to people watching as well. So coming back to the commoner, your character, right? And I want to start thinking about the various things we want here. So this is where I'm going to start putting in notes about what I want for various things. So character creation summary, I'm going to start right from the top. For character creation summary, what I want is, I want to have quick, how do I want to phrase this? I want to have relatively quick character creation with random tables where possible. Okay, and those will always be optional if you're doing the quick method. You can just glance and pick something if you want. Life path character generation as a recommended alternative And we're going to put that in the appendix, in Appendix 1. And there's something we can actually do here where we can actually do hyperlinking, but this is just notes for the moment, so I'm actually going to leave it. I'm not going to call it Appendix 1 because it's going to confuse me later. It's in an appendix later. Okay, then we come to careers. Careers, so for this one, we're probably... I think we're going to save things like your parents' upbringing for life path, and it's not going to be an element necessarily of quick character generation. So for careers, the way I've thought about this, so I did actually come up with different ways of doing this. I've actually come up with big career lists, which I'm looking at on my other screen here, where I have 24 urban careers and 24 rural careers, and there is some duplication between them. But having thought about it a little bit more, I want to do something a little bit more along the lines of Coriolis, another Year Zero game. And in Coriolis, they have, I think they call them concepts. Yeah, concepts and sub-concepts. There are 13 concepts, and those are kind of like high-level... in fact, I think it's similar to what they do in 5th edition D&D, where you have classes and then you have... archetypes or something like that underneath them, where you have these like specialized classes or subclasses, where once you get to like level 5 or whatever, you can start branching out and being a little bit more of a specialist. It's a similar concept, except you choose it at the very beginning of the game. So the way I would do it here is I would have some high level archetypes, if you will. They might not call them careers. In fact, I might just call it, just for now, we'll call it archetype. Again, I can change this terminology whenever I want. Archetype and career. So for this, what I want to have a number of high-level archetypes. Each containing a number. I'm going to say, we'll just pull a number out of my arse here, 3 careers. Because I've been living in Germany for so long, I like to capitalize certain nouns. Okay, so as an example, we'll have example. Peasant archetype. And under that, we're going to have a farmer, a herder, and something else. Let me look at let me look at my other page here. Rural careers. God, there are a lot. 24 is a lot. Oh, this is like kind of level of granularity you need to think about. So with the example here with a farmer, this is an agricultural farmer, not an animal farmer. Although most people had animals in their homes, so you were kind of both. A farmer was everything. Herders are very specifically about people who do not do any kind of agriculture. They have flocks of sheep, they have a flock of whatever they've got, and they're taking them out and letting them graze all day, keeping watch over them, and that sort of thing. So you have a different skill set for both of those, but they're definitely both peasants. They're outdoors, dealing with, animals and agriculture, that sort of thing. So some of the other options I've got here for peasants are things like, peasant is just a very general term anyway, so a lot of these could apply. But I've got things like a fisher, for example, a fisherman, a fisherwoman. They theoretically could go into here, but I kind of want to go with people who are hunting or trapping. That would be a specific archetype where we would have hunters, trappers, and fishers all kind of, I would suggest, under the same archetype, where these are all people who are catching animals for meat. We have millers, so maybe a miller could go under here, but a miller is a bit more of a specialist kind of trade, where I would, and I've got blacksmith, carpenters, that sort of thing. I don't know if I put a miller alongside them, because every village, going with big assumptions here, but kind of basing it on medieval Europe. Many villages would have a miller who, the farmers would take their grain to the miller, and the miller would grind it into flour, and there would be a flour tax. They'd have to give some of that flour to their lord. They'd be allowed to keep some of the flour for themselves, and the miller would also would be able to bake bread for them too often. So if you look what the miller does, the miller is just grinding wheat and is kind of also often a baker. So a little bit different, a little bit more of a specialized sort of trade than what you would call a peasant. A peasant is more what I see as more like a general laborer who is really doing more kind of physically demanding work. And now I've set myself to needing 3, right? So I've got to come up with another one. We'll come back to it. I mean, servant. That's one I had. Servant, meaning, you might think, okay, so a servant is basically, the way I'm thinking of this is somebody who is within, so if you imagine villages within a fief, and you have a kind of liege lord who has his manor house, or, again, I'm assuming gender stereotypes here, apologies. The lord will have their manor house, castle, whatever it happens to be, where that lord or lady can oversee everything that's happening within their lands. And of course, they're going to have lots of servants working for them. They are going to be carrying things. They're going to be cleaning things. They're going to be doing all that kind of stuff, all the really shitty jobs. So for me, that's a really great example of another peasant archetype. Often you'd have servants coming from farmers where they have lots of children, and some of those children will be taken to potentially taken to work for the Lord as servants. So I think that's a good place to put the servant career in as an archetype. In fact, I might just start spelling these out. So there are, I kind of wanted to think about like rural archetypes, and this is really going to depend on the campaign framework, right? Whether you want to have an urban or a rural adventure, really kind of down to the GM, I guess, but also maybe down to the fact that's something I'm missing out here. First thing you need to talk about is group concept. I'm not going to put TBC, I'm going to spell this out right now. Before creating individual PCs, the players should discuss the GM and players should discuss the framework of the adventure or adventures they will be playing. That way you don't have a mix of okay, let me give some examples. In fact, I think I've written this down where I put my careers as well. Examples. Here we go. I have already done this. And you can roll d6 if you want. So, some examples of what I mean by group concept. Peasants from the same small village. So you wouldn't be rolling, for example, any urban archetypes for that, right? You'd be expected to be in the countryside. You wouldn't want to be having players rolling things like a mason, a stevedore, for example. Those sorts of things, which are things I've written down for urban careers. So yeah, that's one. Regulars of a tavern, so that would be more of an urban kind of concept. So, yeah, you might think like, okay, let's build the tavern first as a group. Where is the tavern located? Is it on the docks? It's on the docks. Cool. So, what type of people are likely to be going into this tavern and frequenting this tavern? You're probably going to have people associated with river trade or coastal trade. So you have stevedores. Stevedore, if you're not familiar with that term, is somebody who unloads ships when they come to dock. You'll have sailors, you'll have fisher people, any basically people that work on the river or work with water, that sort of thing. So that, and then you can have people might come up with really interesting concepts, but at least the players are thinking about that as a group concept, right? And to me, that's really important. Coriolis does this. The very first step of character creation is coming up with a group concept. I've run a Coriolis campaign for the Mud and Blood podcast, and I love that element of it because having been a player in lots of D&D campaigns in my home group, we often just jump straight into coming up with this mishmash of player concepts that have no link to each other whatsoever. And you're kind of thinking after the fact, like, how the hell are we all meeting up? And often you're just hand-waving it like, oh, we're just all traveling together. And it's not great. I don't really like it. And I think putting it into the game where you're coming up with a group concept is a much more elegant way of doing this. So, members of a guild, so you're all rat catchers, sewer jacks, beggars, whatever. Again, that'll be theoretically an urban one, but it depends on your setting. You could be outlaws roughing it in a large forest, barely surviving. Outlaw is not a career in this game. Outlaw is something that happens to you. So you're not born as an outlaw. Theoretically, I guess it's possible. But really, you'll be outlawed for some reason. Why are you outlawed? What was you'd still create a character concept before that. But at least you'd all be able to come to, and that is probably the one that's the most loose, where you could kind of create anything you'd want, I would imagine. As long as you got a good idea for why that happened. You could be servants in the entourage of a traveling noble, so that's where things could get a little more interesting with travel, theoretically. I think of this as there's a plot hook for the enemy within, the original enemy within, where it's the plot hook that's meant to get the players interested in the campaign. And it's basically, there's a noble who wants to go traveling to go into the mountains, and he's trying to call able-bodied people to travel with him, offering money and adventure, etc. And that's got the players traveling on the road to kind of start the campaign off. And it's a nice little idea. I like the sound of having, everyone's playing servants, and you can look at the full career list and think like, if there's a noble who's traveling and they've got an entourage, they're going to need all sorts of people around them to make sure that they are traveling in comfort, right? So you can think of lots of different. They're going to have hunters with them for sure. They're going to have lots of servants. So servant, as we've already said, as we've seen there, is a career. Yeah. Anyway, and the last one, members of a traveling circus. I've said circus, but it could be traveling entertainers. It could be a group of mummers. It could be a group of mummers being actors. It could be a group of minstrels. It could be, and their protection or whatever. Yeah. In fact, I have to put circus, but I'm going to put here traveling entertainers, because that was a big part also of medieval life. Cool. So got that out of the way. Urban archetypes. So we'll just pick one I'll pull one out of my arse here. We'll go with artisan archetype. And actually, I've got more than 3 here listed. But that's fine. That's fine. So we're going to go with a blacksmith, a carpenter, and a mason. I'll probably call this physical artisan archetypes, and then we're also going to have I don't know what to call it, dexterous artisan archetypes. And this would be your people that don't need to, blacksmith is expected to be strong, have physically demanding trade, right? Same with carpenter, same with a mason. Artisans, people who are considered artisans that aren't like that would be people like a brewer, for example, although you'd still be expected to lift heavy things. A butcher, a baker comes before brewer, a tailor. God, there's a lot here. I could put here as well. I could put a leather worker, because often that's also quite physically demanding, because leather working would include tanning. Horrible job. Weaver. Yeah, tanner leather worker I'm kind of including in the same one, because I don't see... I want some differentiation in how they're kind of stat it out. Anyway, cool. Then you'd have beggar archetype. And here you would have, they wouldn't actually be, I had to originally have a beggar career, but I've gotten rid of it. And this is where you have people who are doing the really dirty jobs. So you have a gong farmer, which is the night soilmen, as they were called in London in the Victorian times. People who'd go around emptying chamber pots at night because there was no running water, no sewers, although there were sewers, but very basic ones. But people would go around and they would collect shit and they would get rid of it. You have a rag picker, which is a nice Wolfrip career I like the sound of. So also an actual career from our own history. And they're people who basically pick up, they're kind of like one step above a beggar. They'd be picking up scraps and trying to sell them to people. Yeah, a shoemaker, cobbler, clothier, I'm kind of including with tailor. Yeah. Again, I don't want to be coming up with my full list of careers. I've already got a nice set I'm kind of happy with. I just wanted to put in here some examples of what I was looking at. So I'm just trying to kind of do 3 from each, I think. So one more beggary-based one. I'm sure I've got another one here I can use. What's a shit job if you're living in a city or town? Rat catcher was actually quite a... It's not really a beggary type of thing. They're actually well paid and well respected because people didn't want to die of the plague. You know what? I'm going to go with a pickpocket. All right. There's a ton more I could do. Again, I've got 24 listed on my other screen. I'm not going to put them all in here just yet. Something I can do later. So you had peasant archetypes, so let's do 2 more for the rural archetypes. Let's go with forest. No, I wanted to do hunter-based ones. We'll go with animal. How am I going to put this? Because a hunter, I don't want to say hunter archetype because actually a hunter is one of the careers I've got. I'll just put it anyway. Hunter archetype. Again, these are just holding places anyway. We've got a hunter, we have a trapper, and we have a fisher. Okay, one more. A drifter is a good one. A drifter is a good one. That's a very good one. I actually have a vagabond as a career. Cool. Thank you, Meltiras. Perfect. Okay, so I got my hunter archetypes for rural. One more to do. Let's go with the entertainer one, right? Because entertainers we're not just talking about jesters who would kind of be in a working for a king or something like that, like you'd see on telly. You had a ton of people who would kind of keep people entertained. Mummers are one of them. Mummers is another name for actors. Basically, these people would put on dramas for common folk. And they would also put on dramas in cities and taverns, and they'd also be doing it for nobles. They'd kind of be doing it for everyone. But definitely would find them in the countryside too. You'd have minstrels, which technically, if we're doing this alphabetical order, comes before. A mimicker. God, how do you even spell that? That doesn't look right. Dung James. Hello. A mimer. See, I think miming falls under the acting banner with mummery. I'll think of a third one. This is where I do some research too, right? I might actually go grab it off my shelf. Give me a second. So I have this really amazing book called Orbis Mundi 2, which looks like this. It's quite expensive. It was Kickstarted, and I was lucky enough to notice it when it was in Kickstarter like 2 years ago. But basically, it's by an Australian chap called Philip McGregor, and he has created basically this guide to medieval Europe as a base for fantasy role-playing. It's fucking brilliant. He goes into a huge amount of detail in terms of how the kind of European systems of society worked, what kind of, like, if you want to find common careers and stuff, it's all in here. So this is something I will be using. I've already used it a little bit with some of the other elements of what I've been doing when I've been thinking about this game. And there's a section in here. I'm not going to look it up now, but he does have a section on like what people did, sections on villages, on guilds, on cities, all sorts of stuff. You know, how much milling costed back in those times, and you know how everything worked. So I'll look at that later. But I just wanted to kind of give it a shout out because this is an excellent resource if you're planning on doing any game design for a fantasy, historical or quasi-historical or fantasy setting based on, you know, actual medieval history. Like Harnmaster is a good example. Like Harnmaster feels like a medieval European game, even though it's in a fantasy setting. Cool. So I would there'll be a chapter in there, or there'll be a section in there on entertainers, and I'll look it up and find something that fits. The one with dolls, puppeteer, or what do they call them? The puppet shows. They had a name, marionettes. Yeah. Puppet Master. That's a good career name. Got it. Thank you for the grammar suggestion. Now go away. All right, let's zoom in a bit more because I kind of realize the text might be a bit hard to read. Okay, so that's the sort of thing. I'm not trying to do everything. I do have a cover for Pitchfork. I guess I will show it. Why not? Just let me finish talking about this section here. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting some bones in place to say this is how I want to approach archetypes and careers. This is how I want to approach class in this game. If we're going to use the term class, right? I do want this to be classless. But what this does, if you're familiar with BRP, Call of Cthulhu, or Delta Green, or any BRP game, I think even Rune Quest. I'm not super. I've had a brief look at some of the. I can't remember what they're called, like the careers in there. Basically, those games, they identify what your careers, your occupation, what basically at the start of the adventure, like what is your character about? What is their place in society? What is their place in this world? And that gives them a kind of an idea on their starting skills, their starting attributes, that sort of thing. They're starting how they look as a character. And then in BRP, what you do during the adventures determines how you advance and how your experience changes you. And I really like that. We've got a very similar way of doing that already in the Year Zero engine. The careers, I shouldn't say careers. The archetypes that are in every game are very loose. They give you an idea and a starting position on how your character should start out, but they have very, very little to do with your character once you start leveling. Just in the way of talents with some of them, but not all of them. Like Coriolis is effectively a classless game, for example. So it's a great place to start, and that's what I'm doing here. Is I'm going to be using these archetypes, classes, for people to get into like what their place is within the world and the starting adventure, etc. So this is just really to get my head in this document to know what I want to be doing with this when I want to start filling it out later, right? So that's enough for now. Age, I can just put in what I want to do here. I'm just looking at the time. I got 15 minutes. I'll just do this age one, and then I'll show up a cover of the cover. Age, we're going to do the typical thing with Year Zero engines. So if I go to the Year Zero OGL here, it's here somewhere. Age. Just going to copy and paste that in. And I'm going to highlight it. Anything I highlight in, let's do it in light green, is going to be copy pasted from the OGL, so don't keep it like that. And in fact, these numbers are way off. We're talking about the medieval ages. You're going to be old if you're over 40. You're going to be an adult if you are over the age of 16. And you're going to be, do you want to play, do you want to play kids? I don't know, that's probably going to be wrong. So young is going to be 16 to 18. Although, I mean, if we're going to keep it really, if I want to keep it really realistic, you know, you'd be theoretically, anyway, you'd be considered an adult before by the time you're 16 in most settings. And the reason I'm changing is because I don't really want to have minors as players in this. I want to keep it dark. I want to keep the game really dark. Which means I don't want to have. It goes into some places I don't want to go if I do that. So we're going to think about young and inexperienced more than somebody who hasn't actually got a. In fact, this actually works quite well because you can be young, and we could say even up to 20, because you're still going to be picking a career. All the careers will be open to you. You could be a butcher. You could be a 16-year-old butcher. You could be a 16-year-old gong farmer or blacksmith or puppet master. Any of these as a 16-year-old. So that works. I'm pretty happy with that actually. So. It doesn't need to be actually just thinking about when you're considered an adult because you're considered to have an occupation already. So, great. Yeah, I'm happy with that. 20 years of being an adult before you're considered old works as well. Yeah, I like that. Cool. All right, let's show the cover. So, my friend Harry, who is one of the players in our Forbidden Land stream, I commissioned a cover for Pitchfork, and it's not quite finished yet. We have the artwork, but he's sent me some revised calligraphy for the title, and I need to do a little bit of work with that to get it onto the cover. So I'll show you the cover and the calligraphy anyway, because it's fucking awesome. Where are we? Pitchfork. Here we go. So, it says a TIFF file. I don't know if Windows Photos can open a TIFF file. Let's try it. It can. There we go. So here we go. This is the Pitchfork cover. Obviously designed to look like a manuscript. And yeah, kind of gave him free reign to come up with what he wanted for it, and I'm really happy with how it's turned out. So, yeah, lots of little things in there. There's a couple of Easter eggs. For example, this shield, the heraldry on there is actually from an actual place, which is cool. I'll leave that as an Easter egg for people to find if they want to. This black spot here is actually here's a preview. This is with the old calligraphy, which we're not using anymore. So this is a cover mock-up. This is what the cover would look like, but I'm going to be changing this. The reason this is being changed mainly is because we had some feedback that this looked like it was saying Pitchfork, and once someone said that, I couldn't unsee it. So, yeah, unfortunately, I love it. It looks really good, but yeah. And I've got my game logo here in the bottom left, my publisher logo, which is why it's black here. But yeah, that's the cover, and the final artwork for the title card, I think, is this one. Yeah, this isn't. I've got a higher res scan for this one, so this is just yeah, what it looks like. But it doesn't say Pitchfork anymore, so that's the main thing. So that is going to slot in here at the top. And I'm going to then, like you can see here, so this is actually, I did a little bit of work in Photoshop with this one to get it looking how it did. So if I was to zoom in here on the sides here, this is a solid color here. It doesn't look like there's no painting texture behind it or anything like that. And I will actually be changing that. So I'm going to be using a like a parchment texture as anyway, if anyone uses Photoshop or something like that, or photo manipulation software, I'll create basically I'll use a texture which will be a separate layer and will be blended in so that it looks like this is a page out of a manuscript. That's a cover. Anyway. The reason I did that, by the way, so this is this is something I tend to do. I spend money on a piece of artwork, and I get it commissioned. I don't go and look stuff up. I come up with my concept of what I want. I spend a week or two mulling over exactly how I think this game should be looking, how I want it all. What I want from it exactly. What makes it unique, and then both as a way of keeping me motivated to keep working on it, and also motivated because I've spent money on it, but also as a way of having some inspiration. I'll commission some artwork, and with some games like Nord Saga was a previous game I had been working on before this, which I've put off to one side for various reasons. For that one, there are different twists on the fantasy races, so it was important for me to I'd come up with descriptions on paper on how going from mental imagery of how I want these things to look, written it all down on paper, and then I gave it to an artist and said, I looked up, we agreed rates and everything, and I said, okay, this is what I want. This is a very detailed description of like what the different races look like, and go from there. And he got all of them right on his first not right, but like he came up with something that was even better than what I had in my head on first attempt. And there was only one where his interpretation of what I'd written wasn't quite what I had in mind. So it took a little bit of toing and froing to get that right with some like rough sketches. And in the end, had some great images, and those really helped make the setting come alive for me and help me stay motivated to keep writing in it. So that's something I do. Yeah, so that's the cover. Let's keep going. I've got 5 more minutes. I'll just keep going until the stream ends, basically. But attributes will be the next one. So here I'm gonna be sticking with the 4 standard attributes. When I say standard, that just means they're going to roughly equate to strength, agility, wits, and empathy. The 4 standard Year Zero engine attributes, but using well, it's not Vazen. It's similar to Vazen, but similar to Vazen, I'll say. And I've already come up with what these are. I've spent a little time thinking about what I wanted here. So we've got physique, we have finesse, we have wits, and we have empathy. This is very similar to Vazen. Vazen, it looks exactly the same, except for finesse, they have precision. But I like the term finesse a lot for some reason. I think I first saw it in a game in Blades in the Dark, and it's a really nice way of talking about manual dexterity, finger dexterity. Dexterity would be a great word to use, except it has a lot of baggage because of D&D, and I don't want to use that. I don't want people thinking that they can use agility with finesse. Finesse is not about speed and nimbleness. That's what physique is about. So physique is all of your physicality, how fast you are, how strong you are, how fit you are. In fact, you could replace that and call that fitness, and it would be exactly the same thing. Finesse would be your coordination. I don't know why I'm putting these in. In fact, I could just put the... Anyway. Yeah. So that's what I want. That's what I'll be putting here, and I'll probably put little blurbs for what each of those mean. Skills then, under skills, I would be giving a list of what I want, and I have come up with this as well. Let me pull it, copy and paste from somewhere else. Check this out. $16 skills, each tied, 4 will be tied to each of the attributes. So under physique, we have melee, might, move, and stamina. Under finesse, we have craft, marksmanship, sleight of hand, and stealth. Wits, healing, lore, observation, and survival. And empathy, animal handling, intuition, manipulation, and performance. Issues with this, crafting under finesse skills. Crafting usually sits under strength in the Year Zero games, but I don't feel like that's a great fit. It almost needs to fit under wits, but this is where the system starts breaking down a little bit. This took me a lot of time to come up with, because I'm constraining myself to having a certain number of skills for each attribute. Now, I might change this in future as well. In fact, some of the Year Zero games, well, one of the Year Zero games does this, Coriolis. Coriolis has 16 skills, like me. But they don't have them. They're not, and they are tied to specific attributes, but they aren't weighted the same. So in Coriolis, you have 8 normal attributes, or standard attributes, I think they're called, or general attributes, in fact, and 8 advanced attributes. And if you've played any role-playing game, you'll know what that means. Advanced skills just mean you need to have at least 1 rank in it to be able to use it. Otherwise, if you've got no training in that, you can't do it. But that's also a sci-fi setting, so things like medicine and piloting and using a computer, or hacking a computer, I should say. Obviously, you need to know what you're doing, otherwise you're not going to be able to do it. Whereas we're looking at kind of medieval Europe analog, and it doesn't really work here. However, I could use something similar and go with, divorcing them completely from this 4 skills to an attribute idea, and just have the right number of skills for my game. Because I've scrubbed over this list a lot over the past 2 or 3 weeks since I've started thinking about this game, or a little bit longer than that, in fact, and coming up with something that I liked. So, and in the process, that means there's some on here that I've removed that I kind of wanted, but I had to weigh up a decision of, can I include it somewhere else, or how important is that to my game? Because if you're including a skill here, that's basically saying these are the things that you can do in this game. And yeah, I feel like this is kind of a good list. Yeah, so what you're asking about now, Melty Rose, is what is in italics after the skills. So what I'd come up with earlier is, and I'm not 100% sure on this, is rather than having talents, was having specializations. And this would be if you've got areas of knowledge. Oh my god, sorry. If you've got areas of knowledge, specific areas of knowledge, you would almost have like a lower level skill in that. So for example, you'd have a skill specialization of, I'll just pick one out for a peasant. Yeah, a lot of these don't feel very peasanty or commoner. Like the sleight of hand one, disarming, lockpicking, pickpocketing. I'm not going to have a thief career in this, so that kind of needs to be thought about. Although there are some like beggary ones that might work for. Herbalism as an example. So you're playing a peasant who you're playing some sort of like a herbalist, for example. Which I think I've got written down. I do have written down as a career. You'd obviously one of your main specializations would be herbalism. That would fall under healing. So you know how to heal, but you specifically know how to heal with herbalism. So you might have a little bit more general knowledge around healing as a generalization, but really you get extra dice when you're using, or you get however I'm going to make specializations work. If you're doing it specifically with herbalism, you're going to be doing it better because that's your area of specialization. So with things like knowledge-based skills, that's where I've spelled that out with like you have. I was trying to think about like what commoners would know knowledge-wise, because commoners wouldn't be educated. They wouldn't know things about like if you think of Call of Cthulhu, for example, you wouldn't, or I'm trying to think of BRP. So BRP, in fact, I have it right in front of me. Mithras, for example, is a fantasy BRP based game. And you have professional skills in here with things like bureaucracy, oratory, commerce. Yeah? Those don't apply. Those don't really apply for commoners. So, but they could. And if you were playing a character, like I was talking at the beginning of the stream about this being focused on commoners, but I will address martial types and criminal types and probably even noble types, or the burgher and noble classes in future supplements. And for those ones, lore would definitely, there'd be a huge list of specializations under that to see what you kind of what you know. Yeah, exactly. So this is where I'm getting at. Astoneta mentions that you draw specific examples from career paths. So, for example, what I would have under the career. So, in fact, I didn't put this as a needs to come before skills. So, after consumables, I would have here. Oh God, I need it as a separate chapter, in fact, because this is going to be really involved. Careers. So we're gonna have a whole chapter devoted to the careers. Easy to find, easy to reference, etc. So under this careers section, or this careers chapter, I should say, you would have things like farmer, right? Farmer would be an entry, and the farmer would be. You'd have your key attribute. You'd have career skills. Probably, I don't know, I've got 16 skills altogether. This would probably be 4 or 5. So say 4 or 5. You would have not 4/5 of a skill. You would have specializations. And again, I would probably list like 3 specializations, but these aren't specified. Like, you could come up with anything you wanted as well. So if you could have, I'd have 3 listed. This is what I was thinking, is I'd have 3 listed for every single career. And again, I have about 40 careers that I came up with originally. I don't know if that's going to be what I end up landing on eventually. But I was thinking I would come up with 3 example specializations for every single career. Yeah, and then you'd have things like, that'd be like a D6 table for the various tables for personality traits, whatever I end up going with. So if we have like motivations, problems, etc., whatever I'm doing with that, you'd have trappings. So what does the farmer have, including wealth, etc. So yeah. That's where specializations would come into play. So that's what I was thinking. I've got some ideas around how to use specializations, which I'm not 100% sold on yet. I kind of want to get rid of talents. I kind of don't want to use them, but I might end up using them anyway. We'll see. So we'll put a little strike through for now. It's past 11 now, my time. So this is the 2 hours I wanted to devote to kind of, every time I'm streaming, just to do 2 hours. And I could be going on with this for quite a long time. I'm kind of whistling through a lot of stuff. I'm going to be planning on doing this regularly as well, not quite every week, but because there's other stuff I want to do in between. For example, next week we're doing something relating to our Forbidden Lands game. We're going to do a tavern talk, but I might be coming to this the week after. And what I'll do in the meantime is I'll probably do things like coming up with this skill. This like subheader level for skills, for example, like I did there. I can definitely go through the rest of the chapters and come up with similar high level headers that I want for those sections. Maybe not to that level of detail, but I can definitely put them in there. So I've shown you examples of how I do things, and it's basically just a case of continuing with that, and I can do that. So it's not something I need to do more of on stream. But I'll probably, because this whole bit about like what defines your character, I think is quite interesting. It kind of is what sets the various games apart. This is something I would definitely be doing on the stream next time. So I'm going to stop here with specializations, and we'll pick up from there the next time I come on. Just looking at the chat very quickly before I go away. If you have any questions you want to ask me before I leave, go ahead and do it now while you've got the chance. So Astronate has been kind of writing, I agree that some of the skills of examples here might fall outside of the career paths. Yeah. Would the commoners stay commoners and follow their career path once the adventure ends? Not necessarily. This is originally based on Wolfrup. This was starting life as a Wolfrup hack, but I want it classless, and that means if something happens in the story and your character no longer is a farmer because of what's happened, they are now enlisted or they become something else, they basically become that new career because it makes sense in the story. You don't need to have it defined on your character sheet. That is who you were when you were starting the game, but it's not who you are once you start playing. And that basically is how every BRP game works, right? You have your career, your occupation, whatever it's called, your profession, at the start of the game, but really as a campaign unfolds, your character develops in whichever way they develop, right? And you don't need to necessarily mark on that. You don't need to change, like scrub out your career, for example, in this one, and put like, I'm not a farmer anymore. I'm now I'm an enlisted soldier or something. I don't know. Or I've become a burglar. Or I'm an outlaw now. Scrub it out and put outlaw. You can, sure, why not? Do whatever you want. But the idea is it's not like Wolfrup where you've moved into a new career and you're limited to advancement options in that new career. No, the career is basically the careers as listed in the book are there as archetypes to flesh out your character so it makes sense within the setting. And then once the game starts, it's up to the narrative to determine how your character advances. So there won't be any. It's not really a thing I'm interested in pursuing. It's one of the small things that are very iconic with Wolfrup that I actually really don't like. Having run and played a lot of Wolfrup. Okay, we got one more comment here before I shoot off. Idea: commoners have a young years profession, then a paid work is older. Most apprentices, apprentice first, specialist if older. I'm thinking, for example, farmer starts as farmer, it can be herder or specialist. Yeah, sure. Again, you missed out at the beginning. I was talking about having a life path generation system. I'm not. This is the quick character creation. So I've actually put here at the top. This is quick character creation with random tables where possible. Life path character generation will be the recommended alternative, and I'll put that in the appendix, which is kind of how they do it in Forbidden Lands. So my plan there is that you have an upbringing, which is your parents' profession, because in medieval Europe, as soon as you were old enough to help out, you'd be helping your parents with their profession. And the idea is you get those skills, then your body develops in a way, like if you're a farmer, you're going to be quite strong. Your physique is going to be relatively high if you're out doing manual labor from a young age, right? So yeah, that's the first part. I've played around with some life path generation systems in a previous edition of this, a different game, which was my first Wolfrup hack, going back like 3 years now. And in that one, you had your parents' upbringing, you had your apprenticeship when you were kind of like 12, 13, 14. So potentially you could do something else, especially if you're from a family that had lots of children, for example. You wouldn't necessarily be needed to help out with your parents' profession. So you could have a separate, you could continue with your parents' occupation, or you could do an apprenticeship. And then once you come of age, once you're like 16 to whatever age, once your apprenticeship ends, you pick whatever you want, but within the life path system. So I had like, depending on what you were doing as an apprenticeship, you had specific options you could choose a role on to determine what your follow-on profession would be as like an apprentice. Not apprentice, that's the word I just used. Like as a new profession as you're coming of age. Do you stay with what you were doing as an apprentice, or do you go and do something else as a new apprentice for something else? And if you were doing that new thing, anyway, I don't know if I'm doing that, but that's something I have done a lot of thought about. It adds a level of granularity that I'm not 100% sure I think adds a lot to character creation. I think just having your parents' upbringing and then choosing your profession, I think, is enough, assuming that your apprenticeship is either with your parents' profession or with what you do after. So that's probably how I'll be doing it. But yeah, exactly right. You could start as a farmer, which is what your parents' profession would be, your upbringing, and then you could become a herder, which is a separate career. All right. Thank you very much, everyone who's watched live. How many? I got 7 viewers live, which I think one of them might be me. I don't know. Thanks for the comments too. That's very motivating for me to keep doing this sort of thing. I'm assuming most of you, I recognize most of you from having voted on the poll I put together to see what I should be doing today. That's cool. There were like 2 options because I did polls in various different places, different communities, and there were quite a few options coming up that were clear favorites. So it's really helped narrow down in my mind which things I should be focusing on and which ones I should absolutely not really put much time or thought into at this stage, because nobody's interested in them. Yeah. Forbidden Lands Legends and Adventurers is exactly the concept. You have an upbringing, and then you pick your career. So that's kind of simple level, which is kind of what I'm thinking of going with. Yeah. But in this one, I'm going to be tailoring it a little bit more like what you do in Mithras, and I think Aquilare had it as well. Tony Astoneta, I think you can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but in those ones, Definitely, actually, in Aquilata, you did it as well. You define your. It's actually, rather than just saying upbringing, it's saying your parents' profession. And I think that's a nice little flavorful differentiation, because upbringing, you could be an orphan, you could be some like if you look at some of the options in Forbidden Lands, it has, some of them have nothing to do with parenting. It's more like an apprenticeship, or just like a kind of weird way you were brought up as a child. Whereas with this, the focus of this is very much you were a commoner within society, within this feudal society, and what's your place within that? How did you grow up within it? So there is an assumption that you had parents in a profession. But yeah, cool. All right. So thanks very much again, and let's see, what am I going to be doing next? I'm going to be live streaming on Thursday. It's going to be a bit of a chill session. I have had an absolutely mental 4 weeks where every single weekend I'm doing 3 or 4 things role-playing related. My wife is not happy with me, but I want to get this stream started, and I want to keep momentum going. But I need a bit of a break from this sort of thing. I did a review this morning for my podcast. It's a lot, and so Thursday is going to be a little bit of a chill. I'm going to be playing a video game. I haven't played video games in ages, so it's kind of a nice little luxury for me. I'm going to be doing it on stream. It's going to be The Division 2, which I've never played before, but I've bought and I've got it installed. And I'm going to be playing with a number of people here. So Astaneta, who's been quite active in chat, he's going to be playing along with me in multiplayer. And I've got an old friend of mine in Canada. He's going to be playing, and another friend I've met through my podcast, also Canadian, who will be playing. And everyone else, so Astaneta and the other two, they're all old Arma players. So they're quite, that like Division 2 being like a third-person tactical shooter, with obviously RPG and other elements and everything else. I kind of know what the game's about, even though I've never played it. They're bringing something to our little squad of 4 that I won't be bringing, because I played a little bit of Arma. My brother dragged me along. I think I played it twice. I played a bit of DayZ and stuff, but I never really got into tactical shooters. So it'd be interesting playing with them. I'm gonna be like the kind of casual one thrown into the middle. But yeah, that's what I'm gonna be doing on Thursday. We're gonna do that for the next 2 Thursdays, in fact. So this coming Thursday and a week after. This channel is really focused on tabletop role-playing games, and I want to keep it that way. But again, I think just to keep the momentum going, I think coming up with twice a week, coming up with content is quite draining on top of everything else I do. So I need a bit of chill out time, and I don't expect people necessarily to watch in the same numbers as I've been getting so far at the beginning with this other stuff. But if it sounds like something you might like to watch, it's going to be 2 hours, same time as it is now, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. European time. And yeah, hopefully just kind of chilling out, playing some video games. The reason I've chosen The Division 2 is actually quite specific. In any video games I might play on this channel, whether it's single player or multiplayer, will be chosen so that it has something to do with something happening on this channel. The Division 2 has specifically been chosen because we're going to be running Twilight 2000, the newly announced game by Free League. We're going to be running that on the stream, and The Division 2 is probably the video game closest to that role-playing game in terms of like current ones. Yeah, so you're playing in The Division 2 you're playing a military unit in a post-apocalyptic event, soon after the event. So very similar to how Twilight 2000 is kind of set up. So yeah, that's kind of more to get me as a player in the new Twilight 2000 into the kind of that headspace and kind of looking at some inspiration for how that works, how that setting is going to work. Yeah. Anyway, next Sunday we're going to be doing Tavern Talk for episode 2 of our Forbidden Lands actual play. So I'll be joined by as many of the players that can make it. They'll be coming along. We'll be talking about combat, because that's what we did in episode 2. Spoilers if you haven't watched it yet. Yeah. And then I might be coming back to this the week after or doing something else. We'll see. Kingdom Come is an option. I have it. I have played, I think, about 75% of the single-player mission before I got smacked in the face with a bug, and I couldn't complete the mission when I was on. I spent ages online trying to find workarounds for it. Couldn't get past it. It got me so fucked off. I was like, you know what? I've had enough of this game. I've poured I don't know how many hours into it. I was just like, nope. I'm so pissed off with this game right now because of this bug. So yeah, it's kind of I think it's been patched since then. It's had several patches since then because that was a while ago, more than a year ago. So maybe that could be on this. That could be a good game for Pitchfork, for example, because you are kind of playing a peasant who's thrust into adventures. So yeah, that would be a very applicable role-playing game, video game to play for Pitchfork. So maybe, sure. There's some other games. Another game I'm working on is called Mousepunk, which is basically Mad Max with mice. So yeah, and there's reasons why I've chosen that. But basically, that's the other big game I'm working on other than Pitchfork. And yeah, I think for that one, Mad Max would be a good game to play, just because I'm going to be tapping into so much imagery and like the fluff is going to be very, very heavily influenced by Mad Max, and specifically Fury Road and the video game, because they're a bit more generic in terms of setting. So yeah. Anyway, I'm over my time. I promised my wife I would be finished as close to 11 o'clock as possible, so I'm gonna stop it here and take off. So again, thank you very much for watching, and yeah, if you're watching this on YouTube after I upload it there, if you want to watch live and be involved in the chat and stuff, then yeah, I'm streaming live on Twitch twice a week, as I've just said, Thursdays and Sundays. So go ahead and check the comments below. There'll be a link to my Twitch channel. If you click on the purple follow button, assuming you create an account and you're logged in, anytime I go live, you'll get an email letting you know that that's the case, and then you can come and join in. So yeah, thanks so much, everyone, and yeah, catch you next time. Bye. And now the awkward moment where I try and stop my stream because I've not been queuing it up. There it is. All right, bye.